Anton was sitting behind the wheel of his car, checking the route on the map. He was heading to a small, remote town he knew nothing about until he received a letter from a notary. It stated that Anton had inherited an old house from a distant relative located on the outskirts of this town, surrounded by forests and hills. None of his family had mentioned this relative, and Anton didn't even really know who he was. However, the prospect of becoming the owner of property seemed tempting, and he decided to personally inspect the house. As he drove along the narrow, deserted roads, Anton became increasingly lost in gloomy thoughts. The trees lining the highway with their twisted branches and fallen leaves added a sinister tint to the landscape. A thick fog began to roll in, and as he approached his destination, a feeling of anxiety intensified. When he finally arrived in the town, he was greeted by narrow streets and low, gray houses. The locals appeared withdrawn and looked at the newcomer with reluctance, as if they knew something he did not understand. Anton dismissed this as mere suspicion and fatigue from the long journey. He headed to the notary. "This is an old house. It's several hundred years old," the notary explained, handing Anton the keys. "But I must warn you, Mr. Morozov, the house has its history. Rumors circulate in town that strange things have happened there. No locals have gone near it for many years." Anton smiled politely, confident that these were just local superstitions. However, he was intrigued by what secrets might be hidden within those walls. He thanked the notary and set off for the house, which was a few kilometers from the town. As Anton approached the old building, he was struck by its size. The huge mansion loomed over the fields, surrounded by dense forest, as if hiding from prying eyes. The walls of the building were covered in moss, and the windows appeared dark and empty, as if long forgotten. Despite its dilapidated state, the house exuded a sense of grandeur, as if it held memories of times long past. Upon entering, Anton felt a strange sensation. It was as if the walls were watching him, and the air was filled with the stench of decay, which was more than just mold. Old newspapers littered the floor, and he had to navigate through piles of debris. The house was enormous, long hallways, nooks, and numerous rooms. When he ascended to the second floor, something caught his attention at the end of the corridor. It was a door made of dark wood, seemingly older than everything else in the house, as if it didn't belong to this time. The key in Anton's hand seemed to slide effortlessly into the lock, and the door creaked open. Inside was a room shrouded in darkness. At the center stood a massive wooden table, etched with strange symbols on its surface. Shelves lined the walls, filled with dusty books, scrolls, and maps. In the corner stood a huge mirror with a silver frame covered in cobwebs. The mirror emanated an icy aura, and Anton instinctively stepped back. He leaned closer to the table to examine the symbols carved into its surface. They didn't resemble any known language, yet they felt eerily familiar. Anton absentmindedly ran his fingers along one of the lines on the table and felt a strange shiver course through his body. At that moment, the room filled with a heavy, oppressive feeling as if the very air had become dense, suffocating his consciousness. The mirror in the corner began to flicker. Anton took a step back, sensing an intensifying fear. In the mirror, instead of his reflection, he saw a figure standing behind him, a tall, emaciated creature with long, grotesque limbs and a faceless visage. His heart stopped, but instead of fleeing, he felt paralyzed, unable to move. The creature approached him, its movements slow, but each step felt like a silent march of eternity. "This is impossible," Anton muttered, finally regaining the ability to move. He dashed toward the door, but as he exited into the corridor, the house transformed. The walls seemed to stretch into darkness, becoming dense, as if alive, and the hallways were longer and more winding than he remembered. Every step echoed, but the strange feeling of being pursued lingered. Anton ran, hoping to reach the exit, but each new turn led him into a dead end or back to the same spot where he started. It was as if he had fallen into a closed labyrinth with no way out. "Who are you?" he shouted, turning to face whatever was following him. In response, a sinister laugh echoed, a multi-voice sound that seemed to consist of many whispering voices. Suddenly, another door appeared before him, framed by a dark glow. With trepidation, Anton opened it. It was a hall where the ceiling vanished into darkness, and the walls were covered with thousands of mirrors. Each reflected his face, but not the real one. In each reflection, his features were distorted, twisted, as if he were not himself. "This is your truth," the voice said, and Anton realized the sound was emanating from within his own consciousness. His body trembled, and he fell to his knees, feeling as though he was being torn apart from the inside. Darkness consumed him, his consciousness blurred, and the only thing he managed to hear before losing himself completely was the sound of his own scream, dissolving into the silent abyss. The next morning, the inspection workers arrived but found no sign of Anton. The house was locked tight, and inside there were no traces of human presence, nor any indications that anyone had been there for the last century. The fog enveloping the town remained as thick as it was on the day Anton first set foot on the threshold of the mysterious mansion.